Hello, and welcome back to Humanity First. Today, we wanted to continue covering the sensational story, the unfolding drama between Anthropic and the Department of Defense. We covered this particular topic a few episodes ago, but there have been some revelations and some developments since, and so it merits bringing it up again. So, just to recap, the Department of Defense has had a concerted effort at trying to reach out to AI companies and to sign contracts with AI companies to see how they can use the growing power of AI for military applications. And they have signed contracts with all the big major companies in the US, including Anthropic. Anthropic actually has a $200 million contract with the DoD. And there were, though, some disputes recently about the exact terms of the contract. The Department of War wanted all these AI companies to essentially give carte blanche to the DoD to use their models however they see fit. Whereas Anthropic, they had two red lines, which is the usage of models for mass surveillance and to power fully autonomous weapon systems, where they're essentially saying that you can use our models for anything you want, but you can't use them for these two purposes. And they wanted to include that in their contractual agreement. So they refused to sign this statement that the DoD was trying to force on all the different companies. Of course, everyone else presumably signed, which is worth keeping in mind. But there was a lot of friction about that. And we mentioned last time that actually Anthropic had made concessions to the DoD before, most notably a few months before that, this most recent flare-up in tensions. Anthropic had conceded to allow their models to be used for cyber attacks, so that the DoD could go ahead and use Anthropic to conduct cyber attacks on adversaries. And it has emerged since then that, in fact, the DoD had used Anthropic for exactly that purpose in Venezuela. So we don't have a lot of details about exactly how Anthropic's models were used in the operation in Venezuela in January, but it seems like the subtext is that likely these Anthropic's models were used to conduct cyber attacks on Venezuela to extract information about presumably Maduro's whereabouts. So Anthropic had already relaxed a lot of their restrictions, but they had these two red lines that they want to stick to, and the DoD is not satisfied with that. They want total capitulation. They want to be able to use their models however they see fit, with absolutely no need for compromise or debate with private companies. So that's the source of the tension. And ever since then, there has been mounting escalation. So it seems like the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, met with Dario Amodei. Dario was summoned to DC to meet the Secretary of Defense, and they had a pretty contentious meeting on Tuesday, where apparently the Secretary of Defense just told Dario that either he would sign this agreement, either he would totally capitulate by Friday, this Friday, so in a few days, or one of two things would happen. Either Anthropic would be placed on a kind of on a blacklist, so that companies that deal with the Department of Defense to any degree wouldn't be able to use Anthropic, wouldn't be able to have any dealings with Anthropic. Or the DoD would use some law that is meant to be applied in emergency situations and allows the government to compel a company to support the Department of Defense. So he's essentially telling Anthropic that either they fully comply, or he will either use the law to force them to comply, or he would strangle them, strangle their revenue by putting them on this blacklist. And then huge companies have at least some dealings with the DoD, and so that would force all those companies to stop using Anthropic. And Anthropic, their main moneymaker is their enterprise users, is Anthropic being used by enterprises, selling to businesses. And so he's really going for the heart of like Anthropic's business strategy. So Dario gives in, or Pete Hegseth kills Anthropic, or Pete Hegseth uses the law to force Anthropic to give him what he wants anyways. And that's where things stand as of right now. So we'll see what ends up happening out of this. But I wanted to make 2 points, or talk about 2 things. First of all, what we're talking about here. How can models be used for military applications? What exactly is the military asking for? And the second part is, what is the significance of this? So firstly, what is the military actually asking for? So we talked about this in the past, but you will notice that these companies, they'll spend their certain parts of the training when they're building up the model's capabilities, where they build in certain safeguards to the model. And those can be applied in different ways. There are safeguards applied to the model itself. So like, for example, there's pre-training where the model is becoming better and better at predicting text, like the next word or next token that will come if you give it a certain text input. And then there's post-training, and parts of post-training have to do with aligning the model and making sure that the model will not, for example, answer if they're asked dangerous questions, or will not use vulgar language, or will not generate pornographic images if you're working with a multimodal model. So they're essentially training steps that enforce good behavior on the model. And, so that the model will refuse if you try to ask it to help you work on a script that's meant for some like a cyber attack. The model will refuse. If you try to ask it how to develop a weapon, the model will refuse. If you try to ask it to mass produce propaganda for you, the model will also refuse. And those are all things that are applied by these model providers as part of their training loop. The model is trained to refuse these requests. And companies have different strategies for how they do that. They use generally the same techniques, but every company has its own flavors about the exact training regimen that they use for alignment or safety. And then usually on top of that, after you have the full model, you also have you have other filters that are applied to the input, and those are also part of the safeguard mechanism for the model. So like maybe you can there are pretty good like simpler smaller models that can score like how dangerous a certain prompt is, or whether it's making references to bioweapons or something like that. And those smaller like those filtering steps will filter out bad inputs before they even make it to the big model. So all of this is designed so that the end product will robustly refuse to answer things that might be dangerous or bad. Now, effectively, what the Department of Defense wants is they want these safety measures removed from the model. So they want the company, when it's developing their model, to service at the end two models. One version of the model will be the one that consumers will have access to, and that will have gone through all those training steps that are meant to enforce like safety, that are meant to cause the model to refuse to participate in helping with a cyber attack. And then they want another version of the model that is not exposed to these training steps, that might actually be optimized or fine-tuned to be an especially good hacker, for example. And they want Anthropic and other model providers to serve that so that the military can use that for those purposes. And the whole negotiation is about what steps of this training cycle can and cannot be skipped. So Anthropic says, okay, we can skip the step that is trying to train the model to detect and not answer questions for cyber attacks. So we'll service you a model that is perfectly fine, that you can use to help generate like cyber attacks on an adversary. But we will not relax some other safeguards that we have in place that are supposed to prevent the use of our model, for example, for mass surveillance. So that's effectively what Anthropic is asking. And it's important to note that Anthropic has complied with, as we said, some of these requests in the past. They have compromised on certain certain areas of safety training. But the Department of Defense wants total access, wants all the safeguards removed, so that they can use the models however they see fit. And the fact that there's this large public ongoing fight with Anthropic tells you that all the other providers said okay, that they all agreed to this. Now, why is this so dangerous? Well, the reason that this is so dangerous is because ultimately because the model capabilities are improving with time. And as models become more and more powerful, more and more intelligent, then the risks that the models can present grow more and more. And that's where you run into this alignment problem. The problem that how can you keep a model that is potentially very powerful, that can cause a lot of harm? How do you keep this model safe? And ultimately, our best answer to that is the safeguards, is those training steps in post-training where you're trying to make sure that the model is going to behave morally and ethically and refuse to answer certain things that it shouldn't answer. So that removing all of those restrictions massively increases the risk that these models would end up causing a disaster as their intelligence grows, as the model capabilities grow. And so that's roughly the story of what's been going on there and the significance of this fight that's happening. But now let's talk a little bit about the implication of this. So first of all, the most obvious implication: these models, apparently now it has come out that these models are being used. All the model providers have an agreement with the Department of Defense. They are servicing them models with reduced restrictions, including Anthropic, and these models with reduced restrictions are being used in military operations, and have apparently been used for military operations a month ago. And I have no doubt that these models are also being used in Ukraine, and they're obviously useful. They're obviously do give a military edge. So obviously, what does that do? It incentivizes all other nations to pursue a similar path. I'm sure that officials in China's government and in the PLA, in China's military, are looking at this and are tracking America's usage of AI in its military. And if it's successful, as it seems that it obviously is beginning to be successful, so that it gives America some sort of military edge, they'll be working as hard and as fast as possible to make sure that in China that they can match that American capability. And then you have the classic arms race scenario. If China begins pursuing that path, then all of a sudden America notices, and now America is further incentivized to push the usage of AI for military applications. And so you get this is like a firing gun for an arms race in artificial intelligence between nation states, which is definitely not what we want. Because that kind of dynamic, it incentivizes dangerous behavior. It incentivizes building up as fast as possible the exact types of AIs that are explicitly trained, that are explicitly molded for harmful ends with reduced safety. So this is the worst of all possible outcomes, would be that AI development would be essentially that the driving force behind it. Like we have talked before about how really the driving force behind AI up to currently is market forces. It's capitalism. It's that value that these models can bring to businesses. And already that social force that's driving the development is not very good, because it incentivizes companies to run as fast as possible, to compete. And if companies are competing as fast as possible on capabilities, they are relaxing, they're downgrading the importance that they place on safety and on experimenting with safety and alignment techniques. But for as bad as things are now, they would be worse if the primary force behind the development of AI is for national security competition between countries. Because then what you're optimizing for, what you're selecting for, is AI with the explicit purpose of harming others, of aggressively pursuing the interests of a nation state against rivals. Which, I mean, if you can't see the dangers of that, frankly, you're just blind. Like, if you accept that these models are improving rapidly, which all the data is flushing out, the models are improving at a dramatic pace, then and you know how already uncontrollable the models are, how unpredictable their behavior sometimes is, how difficult it is to align them, and to make sure that your strategies that you're using for alignment in training generalized when they're actually deployed in the world, out of distribution. Then, 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 and you know all of these things. You know that it's an absolutely catastrophic mistake to have the driving force be to generate a model that is that in the context of being used for military applications. So that's the significance. And finally, I'll just say this one point. I think this is one huge disagreement that I and other people who are concerned about this about AI development have with individuals like Dario. And it's a strategic disagreement. Dario's whole philosophy is, which I don't discount for a moment, he says that essentially this technology will be developed regardless, and so it might as well be Anthropic that's leading the charge, other than other companies. So if we say, oh, this is too dangerous, we won't develop it, then all we're doing is we're ceding the ground to another company with less scruples to race ahead. And I think that there's truth to that. And he justifies this race to himself by saying that we'll essentially keep monitoring the models as they come out. We'll keep doing our safety research. And if we run across, and he will tell individuals that are in AI safety to kind of keep low profile, to not be doomerish, to not rile things up, because he says that we have to proceed logically and based on evidence, and we will continue to monitor these models. And if they indeed they begin to show signs that this problem will be very difficult, then we'll I guess publish our findings and push for slowing things down. So that's his idea. That's his strategic vision for how we deal with a potentially bad situation where these models, it turns out that we are not able to control them as they get more and more powerful. That's his strategy, that we stay ahead, we keep things calm, and then at the moment of crisis, if we find out later that yes, models are showing these tendencies, then we can share our results, and then we can argue, okay, we need to pause this. But what this situation demonstrates with the Department of Defense and the sheer blindness of the people in the Department of Defense who don't see the obvious danger of this, are only interested in the short term. Oh, we need to keep America at the cutting edge. Like, we need every tool in our toolkit to support our military. What you see from that is that obviously at the point in time where this technology is really very powerful, more powerful than it is today, and it's already powerful, which is why there is this fight. But as it gets more and more powerful, people like Dario and Anthropic will come under enormous pressure by those with political power to concede, to push forward anyways. So they won't be able to stop. Even if they find something dangerous, they won't be able to stop. So this perfect world that Dario imagines, where people are reasonable, where once you show that these models have this tendency to grow increasingly misaligned as they get more and more powerful, or you start seeing some tendencies and preferences arise in models as they get more and more powerful that are dangerous, that everyone will be reasonable and we'll all obviously see the danger of this and stop. That's not going to happen. And if you build a plane and assume perfect weather conditions all the time, then ultimately your plane will crash and burn in the real world. You have to design your strategy for the world that you live in. If you do a calculation, a calculation on pen and paper and assume zero air resistance, and build whatever machine you want to build, assuming zero air resistance, then your design won't work in the real world, because the real world has air resistance. It won't work as you expect. Our strategy needs to fit the actual world that we live in. And what is the only strategy? And to be honest, I don't know a perfect strategy. I wish I did. I wish I could say, this is exactly what we need to do. And if we follow these exact steps, then I can robustly guarantee you that we'll be okay. I can't promise you that. But I can tell you that what will probably increase our chances is that if there is huge public awareness of this problem and a huge popular movement that represents that represents those that think that this technology is dangerous. So that if in the eventuality that someone like Dario in the future realizes that, oh, actually, if we keep going, if we keep developing this technology, we're all doomed. So that when that happens, there is already an established political movement that can push for that. But to say, oh, everyone calm down, it's no big deal, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, we need to stop right now. Where are you going to get the political power to do that? So that is the huge advantage of speaking the truth. And this I will hold Dario on, because he hasn't been doing that. And I understand that he is under enormous pressures. That every time he brings up the subject of the potential risks of developing this technology, he gets all this bad press and he gets attacked and maligned. I understand all of that, but he needs to step up and he needs to be upfront about the risks. Because only then will people be aware of what's happening, so that when things start going poorly, then you're not like, then everyone isn't just like totally blindsided by this and there's no time to react. Then at least people are primed, they're aware of what's happening, they're on board. But I do see that what Dario is doing in public is a form of lying. He is not being exactly upfront with his beliefs. And the thing is, you read something like The Adolescence of Technology, and I do think that everything in there he believes. I think he is wrong on some of the things, and we'll talk about that in a future episode. But I think that is probably a truthful representation of his views. But if he truly has these views, when I see sometimes his like televised speeches or his interviews, he does not adopt the tone that matches what he's writing, what matches his beliefs. And I suspect that consciously or unconsciously, the reason he's doing that is because he to be honest, actually, I don't know why he's doing that. It could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe he just doesn't want to be attacked. Maybe he doesn't want to be alarmist. He knows that if he says something or emphasizes one part of his argument too much, that it will end up on every headline tomorrow. Maybe he doesn't want that kind of publicity or PR, either because it will hurt his company or it will hurt his standing with the administration, or because he genuinely thinks that this will stir the waters and that's will create a more dangerous world or a more unpredictable or chaotic world. I have no idea. I don't know his intentions. But it's a form of lying nonetheless. It's a misrepresentation of the truth. The truth that he believes, which is this technology is going to be extremely powerful. More than powerful enough to wipe out humanity completely. And it's uncontrollable. Those two things alone, those should have you like screaming into the camera every chance you get, if you're being honest, to wake people up so that they realize what's coming. But he hasn't been doing that sufficiently, in my opinion. Even though he's been much better than everyone else, but that's not the standard that he should be held to. And it's unfortunate, it's not fair, but life is not fair. And some people really need to step up more than other people. And if those people, they can do well, but if they don't reach that mark that they need to reach, then they still fail. And so we'll see how the story with the Defense Department plays out. I really hope that Anthropic sticks to their guns. No pun intended. But we'll see. All right, that's it. That's everything I have to say for today. Thank you very much for listening. And don't forget, winter's coming. All right, take care.